Hello and welcome back to Spearman Studios. My name is Nicholas Jennings, and today we're going to be talking about the movie Brightburn. I saw this last week, but I couldn't get around to reviewing it because I was at work, but now I am. And the superhero genre as a whole hasn't really capitalized on making a horror film. I mean, sure, you had Blade, but that was the closest you would get to an actual horror movie in terms of having vampires and such. But that was mostly reliant on action, and you haven't really had that. And Superman as a character has had plenty of different incarnations. You've had Red Sun Superman, you had Black Suit Superman, you had the Injustice version of Superman, the New 52 version of Superman. Tons of different versions of Superman are out there. And to have this movie show up nowadays is kind of interesting. Now, this movie isn't necessarily the best movie in the world, but it has some interesting things. And here we have Brightburn, a film produced by the now rehired James Gunn and written by his brothers. It's directed by David Yarovsky. The film is set in Brightburn, Kansas, where we meet up with the Breyer family, who has an adopted son who starts to exhibit some weird behavior, like being drawn to something in the barn, to breaking metal without bleeding. And as you could probably guess, this is the horror take on the Superman story. Granted, it's not officially licensed by DC or Warner Brothers, but does enough to distinguish itself from the original story. This isn't like a Red Sun Superman where the character is raised in a different country. This is just a pure, different take on the Superman mythos. I found myself really enjoying this film, aside from a certain subplot where about a girl that Brendan likes that never really comes up again after a certain section of the film. It felt really creepy and very disturbing to watch. In the way it's presented, the kid wants to spank his sausage in a room level's kind of weird. That's just, no. The marketing doesn't really lie about this film. The film doesn't waltz around its main selling point. You want an evil Superman film? Here you go. This is actually a truly rated R film. It gets really hard R in certain places in terms of graphics and horror. The gore, and the gore is really sparse, but when it happens, it's pretty effective. The film is fairly paced, I will say. It's about an hour and a half long film. It's paced very nicely. But one of the things that I think could have added to the tragic ending, because it does have a pretty tragic ending, I think overall what needed to be added was a sense of humanity. This is the actual heart of the film that isn't there. So the mother in the film, Elizabeth, played by Elizabeth Banks, she's a great actress. She and the person who plays her husband are both great. But I think the one thing that should have been added is a sense of humanity to Brandon. Now, Brandon, as a character, he starts exhibiting these things, and then ever since that point where he starts exhibiting these powers, it's all going downhill without a sense of motivation. I mean, he does have motivation, if you piss him off, he kills you. But the thing that should be added to add to the whole drama of the situation is we should have seen Brandon do actual good things, right? Because there's a line in the movie, as well as in the trailer, that she says, "I know there's good in you," but we don't really see any of that. I think if you added some scenes where you see Brendan doing good, not only just by himself with maybe some of his powers, it will show that sort of duality between the balance of using your powers for good versus the powers of using your powers for evil. And we all know it's going to end up him, being evil in the first place, but it'll add to that sense of real dramatic weight for the mother in this case, because the mother has tried to make excuses in the film for Brandon as a character. But the problem is that you don't see any of that. You don't see him actually doing good. All you see is him being creepy or being evil, and that's about it. One of the things that this film sorely misunderstands about what it's trying to take advantage of is that Superman as a character is not just super, he's also a man. He's a character with emotions and feelings and thoughts. He does good, not because he's a blue and red Boy Scout, but because he also feels human. if you read stuff like All-Star Superman or The Last Son of Krypton, you will get that sense of Superman's humanity. And I think that's what it was sorely missing in Brightburn. Like, I'm not saying Brightburn is terrible because of it. I'm just saying it really lacked that sort of emotional center that that would allow for a tragic ending like the one it did in Brightburn. In Brightburn's ending, yeah, sure, it's shocking. I liked how it ended. But the thing is, I don't feel like it was fully earned. And if it did go through the whole, if you added a little bit more heart, a little bit more weight to it emotionally, that ending would have been really devastating. Not only for the character that ends up taking the fall, but also for the audience who has been attached to this. Like, some of the best horror movies out there have always been family dramas. You look at The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix, for example. That's a TV series, right? But they understood that the most powerful horror that goes on is always with family trauma. It's always with things that relate to addiction or abuse or anything like that. You look at The Shining, too. Like, Jack Torrance was an alcoholic. It led to a family dynamic that wasn't necessarily the most positive. And I think if you added more family turmoil into this movie, it would have added a real hefty punch of a film. Like, not only would it be really cool from a superhero movie standard, but it would also add more to the effective impact. That's what I feel, at least with Brightburn. And as I said before, the acting is really good. Brandon's pretty effective as a very intimidating looking character. Granted, his face is a little derpy, but when he's doing his Brightburn Superman thing, yeah, it's kind of creepy in places. And I'm not gonna lie, this is actually a pretty damn good looking film aside from one visual effects shot. But this film was made for $7 million, which is insane. Because this looks a little bit more expensive. This looks like it was made for like $50 million instead of $7, which goes to show that it's not necessarily the size of the budget that you have, it's about how far you can stretch your budget and not make your film look like shit. And maybe there's a couple of shots in terms of cinematography that aren't that great looking, but the majority of it looks fine, and the acting's fine, the set design looks pretty fun. I mean, granted, it's like a small town in Kansas, but it's fine. And look, the film's not perfect, I will say that. And I do think that there's plenty of missed opportunities to have had a real good impact on the superhero genre. And it feels like a really fun little Elseworld story. And while the marketing does live up to its promises, it's not that great of a film that I could say is the best horror film of the year or the best superhero movie of the year. It's a fine movie. It just needed to have something in it that gave it more hefty weight. I'm going to give Brightburn a C+. It's a fine movie. And if you're interested in watching it, definitely go watch it. If you're not interested, you're not interested. So, yeah, that's what I have for today. Tune back in tomorrow for my review of Godzilla, and on Friday I'm reviewing Rocketman. So, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.